Hey, folks, welcome to Strong Towns, Ask Towns Anything. So grateful that you're here in live attendees, but also for those that are watching this afterwards. Thanks for taking a moment to dive into this question of how do we approach the complex but necessary reforms of the way in which we deliver housing within our communities, the ways in which we allow for adaptation of existing housing stock, the various types of things that we do in response to local needs. One of the perceptions that we have made clear is that there has been this dampening or sort of removing of the ability to rapidly respond to local need, and as a particularly housing need, and as a consequence of that, it actually has contributed to sort of the intensification of so much pressure in many of our markets where either there's a lack of investment because you need to be assured that it's going to be a good investment, or there's so much investment capital ready to jump into the housing market, and yet so few opportunities for that to be expressed that you actually see the rising of costs at rates that are remarkable. In my community where I live, we're a suburb of the city of Vancouver, and it seems quaint now, but back in 2014, 2015, there was the $1 million line. And that line basically emanated from the city of Vancouver and began sort of to creep out to East Vancouver. And the idea was houses more than $1 million, the average home price was more than $1 million in that area. Well, that line now extends all the way out to the farthest depths of the Fraser Valley. And it's one of those things where it began to sort of move, but then all of a sudden began to just like that line just went whoop across the valley in a way that you think that can't be real, like that can't be right. But we actually can explain many of the reasons why this has happened, and feel the effects of that. So if you're concerned about housing, you're in the right place. Welcome. Glad to have you here. And I want to introduce through Edward the Housing Ready Toolkit, but particularly the 6 types of reforms that we are specifically focusing on. There's certainly a need for other types of reforms around single stair access or other types of things that are necessary, even questions around, building code and fire access and all of those types of things. But we particularly focused on these. And Edward, can you introduce them?
First off, at Strong Towns, if you want to learn more about housing ready, if you want to get your community on the list to be housing ready, here's the QR code. You can go to strongtowns.org under our programs, under housing ready, and you can get your city on this list. Um, I want to share an idea out there, and this is the really controversial idea. And this is, as we're thinking about housing, our housing crisis right now is not a numbers problem. We throw billions of dollars at housing. We subsidize housing. We build lots of housing. We do all of these things, yet the affordability of housing, what it actually costs for that, continues to increase. And what I want to assert and what we're trying to work through with this toolkit and with the messaging that we have to cities is that it's not a numbers problem. It's actually a systems and strategies problem. And when we think about that, we actually have the tools to fix systems and strategies. When I talk to folks that are in the bureaucracy at City Hall, they understand systems and strategies. So we need to work in that mindset. For all of us, this is what we ingrain again and again with all of you, is that there are 4 steps to addressing all of the struggles in our community. So as we think through each of these toolkits, as we think through each of these tools, I just want us to have in the back of our mind this idea of this 4-step process. There are things that all of us are observing in our communities. So diving in a little bit more than just we have a housing crisis, what aspect of that? Thinking about what we and all of the positions we have, whether you're sitting on a city council, whether you are a citizen, a builder, a banker, whoever you may be in your community, they're all things that we actually can do to address that. They're things we can do right now. We should be doing a lot of the right now things and repeating that. Um, at the end of the Housing Trap book, Chuck and Daniel lay out 3 ideas that every city could do. Code reform, growing an ecosystem of incremental developments, and localizing our finance. These are 3 really big pieces. We have at Strong Towns have been working on these as toolkits where we can speak to local governments, or we can speak to City Hall. We released the Housing Ready Toolkit related to code reform. So again, at strongtowns.org, Housing Ready, you can download this booklet. There are many, many things that we could do to address code reform, building code, zoning codes, how we process the codes. I will tell you at Strong Towns, we wanted to look at 6 things that we felt every city across North America could do because we saw these things occur again and again throughout communities all across North America. And our last monthly member exclusive, we had representatives from various cities across North America share how they're applying these. But let me go through that toolkit. If you go to the Housing Ready site, you can actually take a quiz for your community. I hope everybody on this call today takes the time to log in and to take this test. By taking this test to see which of these are there, the first thing is that you can start to see how you align. The second thing is that we will pin you on the map. We'll put your community on the map on that. I think if you've seen, I saw Burlington, Vermont. We've had a couple other cities where we've gone and showcased those and elevated up your community for tackling these pieces. If you go through and you have 4 of the 6 or 5 of the 6, you'll get to the map. If you have 3 or 4 of these that you haven't hit, this is the space to bring it to. Let's talk about it. I would love to talk to you and your community about how you can start to tackle one of those things and get further up that list. So let's go through and talk about the code reforms. The first idea is to allow single family home conversions to duplex and triplex by right in your community. So you have a house in your community. Maybe it's a little tired. Maybe it's labeled as blighted. Maybe there is just it's too expensive to for somebody to kind of acquire as a home in your community because of the real estate values. If I wanted to come in, could I go in and subdivide that into a duplex or break it into a triplex unit with a building permit? Not multiple public hearings, not permission from city council, but could I do that? This is happening all across North America. Monty Anderson with Neighborhood Evolution and Opticos Real Estate shared this. It fascinated the nation because the New York Times reported on it. He bought an older, kind of tired home in his neighborhood and he converted it into uh, this kind of roommate house. He calls them suites, but there's actually 4 units. At the end of the day, there are 4 residential units within that house. Now, each of those can be closed off. Everyone can be standalone, or they could be all opened up to a house. So allowing this, familiarizing yourself with this is what's happening in communities all across North America. It's not banning single family housing, it's providing the opportunity to do additional housing. The second policy is permitting backyard cottages in all residential zones. Now, these are those small, cute cottages that can go where there's a shed or a garage in your rear yard. Unfortunately, we've allowed the planners out there to uh, name these, and they came up with the worst marketing name you possibly could call them. They call them ADU, accessory dwelling units. Nobody wants to be accessory. Nobody's in a dwelling unit. These are homes. So looking at the idea of a backyard cottage, but allowing that by right in your community. So go out, apply for a building permit, convert a shed or garage into one of these small units in your backyard. Um, Different planning districts in different communities around the country put these in all different types of places. When I would administer the zoning code in the last community I worked in, I told the development community these can go behind, in front, below, above, anywhere on the site. It just wherever it fits in the context. Also use terminology that is representative of your community. When I share backyard cottages out on the West Coast, they call them casitas. When I talked about this in Savannah, Georgia, they said these are carriage homes. Each of those terms have an identity within a community. And in Savannah, nobody wanted ADUs. But my gosh, when you started talking about carriage homes, that was like a status symbol. And people would say, "Well, I don't have one. I have 2 carriage homes, and I'm getting ready to to renovate my second carriage home. Like that builds an identity within your community that can move these forward. We also should be looking at all of our zoning codes in a way to legalize starter homes in all of our residential districts. Believe it or not, many of your zoning codes will say that what the minimum house size is in your community. And the footprint of that is far greater than anything that we have seen in the past that our grandparents have done. My grandfather built a starter home that was in that 800 square foot range. There are many cities that require 15 or 16 or even 2,000 square feet as a minimum starting point in your community. Now, this is not to be confused with a tiny home. This is a real, it's not a caricature of a home. It is a real home within a community. But allowing that smaller footprint, just think about the economies of that. Uh, we may not be able to lower our land costs, but we could reduce the amount of two by fours we use, the amount of windows by thinking about and allowing these smaller homes. Eliminating minimum lot requirements in existing neighborhoods. Again, go to your zoning codes, go to your zoning tables. In many, many cities, what has happened is that your city may have been platted out on 20 or 25-foot individual lots. I can't tell you how many places I've worked and read through codes that they've adopted Euclidean zoning. So somewhere in the 70s or 80s, they adopted zoning, and the minimum lot size is 60 feet wide. It is incompatible to those original lot sizes. By abolishing minimum lot sizes, we're able to take a larger lot within a neighborhood and subdivide it into multiple house types. This is really, really important when we talk about financing. It is hard to finance a multifamily unit, but if we could do fee simple, owner occupied, or single family homes, attached or detached, those are things that can be incrementally built. So not all at once. We could build one or two at a time. You can also go to the bank and get access to all of the lending products that are out there. So a builder can get a loan to construct it. A homeowner can go out and get the Freddie and Fannie, VA, USDA mortgages, all those subsidized mortgages for this. In places like Atlanta, and I've heard other parts of the country that have tree canopy requirements, this becomes another really important tool. If tree canopy is an important thing in your community, by subdividing the lots, we can actually carve those lots around where the trees are. So we're not limiting our ability to develop and provide housing. Policy 5 is repealing parking mandates for housing. We actually require in most municipalities more parking for housing than we do for any other use. The 2 to 3 cars per home, the requirement of where we put the garages, the requirement for developers to build on-street parking, all of these things result in excessive parking. There are many places that we don't need that much parking. And places like Norman, Oklahoma, that spent 20 some years battling about housing and battling about parking, were able in a public hearing to do something as simple as changing one word in their code to free up parking, to decouple it from the development uses. So we talk about how do we do these incremental changes. Norman, Oklahoma was able to do this by changing a word in their parking code from required to recommended. People can still provide parking, but you're not bound to provide excessive parking for a development. And let me get to the one. Number 6 is the one that we have received the most pushback on. This is the one that uh, all of a sudden everybody says, oh, there's no way. We've got 26 different people that have to review the permits, our 15-page development application, our rezoning waiver process. All of those things prevent us from streamlining the approval process. And I just sit there and I want everybody to think through what we're requiring for somebody to build a single family home, what we're requiring people to build a starter home or a rear yard cottage in a community. we can actually streamline our processes. Places like South Bend, Indiana, have actually gone and set up a process that you could walk into City Hall and 20 minutes later get a building permit. If you own a piece of property, 20 minutes later, you have a set of building plans and a house plan to go forward. Groveland, Florida have done the same thing. Kalamazoo, Michigan. There are a dozen cities all across North America that have used the pre-approved and pre-reviewed building programs to not just provide houses, it's not to carve out the architect, it's to align City Hall. It's so that at City Hall, the utility department is not battling with the zoning office, that the utility department is now aligned with the building that you want to do in the city, that the fire marshal's regulations are not against the things that are in the zoning code. Getting all of that aligned to the pre-reviewed house plan process is one way. Another way is to just sit down and realize that a building permit application could be a single page. Where is this at? What parcel? What are you building? Who's building it and who owns it? That's a single page application. In many of our communities, the requirements for structural packages and for design review and all of the permit review are things that can actually be provided through by the lumber yard. And they're things that we could review more quickly. We have the ability in City Hall, and I can speak as somebody that did this in a building department. We can review these permits very quickly, even if they're custom builds. But we put so many burdens in front of it that the process and having everybody's opinion on a project, we're more sensitive to that than the struggle and the crisis we have for housing in our community. Um, in the most complicated and complex development environment, probably in North America, is arguably up in Massachusetts. Cambridge, Massachusetts was struggling with this. They added another kind of complicated system, but really smart. They created a zoning category for affordable housing. So they were cautious about housing, but affordable housing was where they really wanted to have this done. So instead of going through years of public process and review for buildings that they needed in their community, they created a zoning overlay. If you meet all the affordable housing components, you do all the deed restrictions, all the financing, all the things to it that's affordable, it's approved by right, meaning that you do not have to go through multiple public hearings to have these approved. I'll leave the QR code up for a minute on the screen, but I would encourage all of you to go to strongtowns.org/housing ready. Go take the quiz. Go see where your city lines up on this. Go tackle these things in your community because you can incrementally start to tackle each one of these in all of our communities. And it's really, really important of going through that exercise in your community to see how these things are approved, to
Mhm.
understand that housing industry. So I see there's lots of stuff in the chat. So I hope I've sparked enough controversy that we can spend the next 40 some minutes talking through this and discussing all these things. So Norm, I will
Yeah.
hand it to you to facilitate because you are way better at that than I am.
No, I appreciate that. First question from Troy here was just asking for clarification about the overlay that you mentioned. Is it for spot zoning? And maybe broaden that a bit to talk about why spot zoning, once we define it, sort of has its place, but also is part of the problem.
Yeah. So spot zoning is when you think about your zoning map. Your zoning map has 4 or 5 colors on it, and generally, like all the oranges and all the yellows and all the reds are together. But if you go in an area that's all red and all of a sudden you take one parcel, one individual thing, and you say, okay, we're going to do something different, or we're going to create a new zoning category for that. That is fundamentally spot zoning. I'm sure the planners will have a much better definition for it, but the idea being that it's not an orderly thing. You're kind of doing something special for one location. What Cambridge did, as I understand it, is they created a zoning category for their city that was applicable to the entire city. So just as you would have all of the different pieces, and it was done as an overlay. A zoning overlay is a tool that planners can use A lot of communities use it to do transit-oriented development. So we want a different set of rules when we buy a transit stop. So we're going to allow that. Or many states, it's hard because of property rights to change zoning. Because if you go from one category to another, you may leave something out. So they create an overlay to allow the flexibility or to have a carrot for something to move forward. So this was a zoning layer over the entire city that property owners could opt into. To opt into, you had to qualify. And all that meant is that you would already fill out all the paperwork for all your affordable housing funding and you submit it to the city. Believe it or not, the person that's working with that paperwork is also in the planning department. So again, very complicated systems, but this begins to untangle it and does it in a way that is in a language that the planners and development community understood in Massachusetts. If this was Florida, it'd be a much more streamlined system. It just because their development process is much different than what we would see in New England.
Let's pick up that first question that Saeed had asked. People just tend to start to think, let me start over. People think to start a family, you should move to the suburb. How do we argue against that? Or how do we have that conversation in maybe a healthier, more fulsome way? And then Erica will go to you after.
Yeah, I don't have that conversation. I find that there's no wins with that conversation. I think having a conversation about allowing incrementally maturing of our communities, allowing for a variety of house types, allowing for people to age in place, allowing, if we think about our human environment as a habitat, our human habitat, think about the biodiversity. So we can talk about it financially by having different uses and different house types. We can weather the storm because we have diversified our portfolio. If I think about a lot of communities, we have AARP has already told us, they've broadcasted this everywhere on all their networks, that they have a loneliness epidemic. They also have a housing epidemic within their membership. So there are people that have big houses that are locked into finance that they can't move. They also have big houses they can't maintain. And why would somebody that's raised their entire family have move out to the suburbs because that's where smaller housing is? So providing that choice. So don't get caught in the trap about suburban and families and all those pieces. If we think about it as a biodiversity, if we think about it as a maturing of a community, we're just allowing that flexibility. We're allowing that option for these things to happen. Um, that's the type of conversation that I would have. We can also talk about urban patterns, the suburban cul-de-sac development. The gated, the community with the big sign out in front has been built to a finished state. Talking about inserting a duplex into that neighborhood is a very difficult conversation.
Mhm.
You will be ridiculed for bringing up that idea in most of those neighborhoods because they've been built with the intent that the only thing that can change in that neighborhood is the maturity of the trees, and maybe the HOA will allow you to change the color of the front door. So they will have their own life cycle. But there are many, many places in our community that follow a traditional network of streets that are follow that traditional pattern that got stuck in amber because of the adoption of our zoning codes. Those are the areas to have that conversation. Work where there is desire, willing parties, and some form that matches that next increment of development.
I grapple with this because we moved from a townhome into a rental home that was larger when we had a 5-year-old who was ready to go to school. And like the gnawing sort of realization for that I have is that I get to live in a slightly less dense neighborhood because it's subsidized by more dense neighborhoods. And there's certainly like a question of fairness. There's a question of, the misery that is introduced simply because we are not providing for the amount of housing that is needed. And yet I get into a pattern where I also I'm like, I'm glad it's not so busy. And I'm like, no, that is more a function of transportation decision making than a question of land use. Arguably, if somebody purchases a third vehicle, that has way more of an impact than if they add an extra ADU. And yet we regulate the one and not the other. And so the question is if we can manage many of those things through sort of just common expectations of what people do with their own property, without having to codify that, I think that can make a big difference as well. But I think that it is on. I've done a bunch of different housing call-ins for radio programs across the US, and it's almost always, hey, you guys and your talk of, introducing more housing types, don't you guys realize that the only type of housing that people want is what we're currently providing? And then it's just a bunch of poor people that can't afford it that are complaining about this. And I'm like, that kind of framing, one, is, certainly not very neighborly, but also drives up the tension around the idea that you could introduce sort of nominal reforms to just test the market, see what's available. I think this is the idea that street food and food trucks, um, restaurants at first were aghast. How can this be? We are a restaurant and you can't allow this type of competition, even though the competitors are saying we're just picking up an old practice. There used to be roving vendors of food all over the place, and nobody died, and or maybe a few people, but then word got out. And as for the rest, like it was fine, and yet now most restaurant owners actually recognize, hey, if we create a food district, if we have that thriving activity in this space, we all benefit. It's not a zero sum game where we all begin to lose, and I think that's a key part of it as well. Um, there's more there, Saeed. We could devote a whole session to this, but let's pick up Erica's question. We might see this theme come back a few times. So, Erica, over to you.
Yeah, I submitted a question a couple weeks ago to you, Norm, about system development charges. So I wonder if Edward can give us kind of your take, Strongtown's take on whether system development charges and their waiver is a good idea or not.
When you talk about system development charges, are these things like impact fees or new development, like a fee you have to pay when you're starting development?
Yes.
Yeah. Um, this this is really interesting, and there's lots of folks that will chime in when we talk about impact fees, and we talk about the the fees that cities extract from folks that are investing in the community. We have to understand what these fees are. So if we step back, this is where a municipality goes in and they say, okay, for growth, we're going to need to buy new fire trucks. We're going to need to build new parks. We're going to have all this infrastructure that we're going to build. We're going to figure out how much it's going to cost to do that. And then for every new home, they're going to pay their portion into it. This is part of that suburban development pattern mindset. This is trying to get everything all up front when we build a community out. This is all one-time dollars. So it's one-time financial investment into something like a park or a police station. All of those things that we build now create a liability, long-term liability on it. I'm extremely cautious about all of those extraction fees because it makes us think that we're rich and we're not. It adds liabilities in the future. It weighs equally whether you build compact walkable or whether you build out on the far edge. And many of the times, the projects I see that are attached to that are things that are about capacity, roadway expansion, water sewer expansion, things that we're trying to catch up on that we haven't done before. And I'll give you an example. I was working in Florida in 2008 and 10 when there was like no money. Remember the market crash? We were letting people go right and left. There was zero development occurring. The impact fees that we were collecting in Florida have a life cycle to it. If the county didn't use them, they had to be given back to the folks that had paid. Well, government never does good at refunds, so they had to spend it. But we also didn't have the money to repave and maintain the infrastructure we already had. So the engineers got kind of smart with this. They went out and added a requirement that any time that a utility company or there was a repair of the road, you couldn't just do an open bill cut. So imagine you have to put a pipe across the road. The utility company comes and they cut out the 2 feet, they put their pipe in, they patch it, the 2 foot, and they leave it. What the county said is, we don't want that because all of our roads are brand new. We want them to look nice. So when you touch the road, you have to repave like the full block. They adopted that as a development standard, and then they went and decided they needed dedicated right turn lanes at all their intersections. So what they were using was an impact fee to add the right turn lane and then therefore repave the entire intersection that needed maintenance on it. This is the way that it leads us to decision making. Also, if you think about some of those impact fees for areas that are in cities, the most compact areas of our city are older downtowns where the roads already exist. There's already a street network where we're at community parks. We're now asking folks building in those areas to build on the edge. So a lot of cautionary pieces to it, a lot of things where that skews folks' mindsets. If we think about the traditional development pattern, what should be occurring is that we should be incrementally building wealth in our community to fund the things we need as we do them. And that's a much different way than what we develop today. And it's very hard for our minds today to think about that we would build a community without a civic building, without a park, until we built the wealth up that we could afford that. Much different development pattern than what we see today. So very long explanation.
So maybe just asking a refinement to that. In Portland, Oregon, like all other states, is having housing access problems. So the governor has proposed waiving system development charges for new development. But I don't understand how that would impact our budgets. So that was very helpful, Edward, because again, like many cities, we don't have the finance decoder skills in our councils, our city councils, I think. So it may take some education for, we've provided a decoder deck to one of our economist city council members, and hopefully the message will percolate through. We went back to 2009. That was the last data that we had available. So I find those graphs to be very, very persuasive. And so thanks again. I appreciate.
And thinking through that for a municipality, what I will tell you is that the municipality will figure out how to get their money. So if you waive it for affordable housing or a type of housing development, it will come out somewhere else because this is the system that they're on to build forward. From the development side, for the developers, the reason that they complain so greatly about impact fees and those types of development fees and utility connection fees and permit fees is that those are upfront costs that are generally have to be paid for in cash. Those are things that the banks don't typically want to give you a loan on because there's nothing tangible out of it. So it is the most expensive money for a project. It doesn't mean that developers can't build in it. As long as it's a predictable number, they can see that. But understanding in Groveland, when they did their pre-approved building plans, what they also did with that program is they deferred when permit fees would be paid. So you'd come into City Hall, you apply for a building permit. They would issue you a building permit, a letter saying you're issued a building permit contingent of payment. Now you had predictability. The builder could go to a bank and the bank could say, oh, the city's not going to pull you around and drag you around for months. You've got approved permits. We'll issue your loan. So now the builder has predictability. They have lending behind them. They can go pay the thousands of dollars they need to do with the right to build. So now they actually had a real project, and it was like they could roll right the system for cash flow.
Yeah.
So
Great.
there's a city conversation and also the developer conversation with that.
We're seeing that with a lot of smaller projects in BC as well. In British Columbia, the city of Burnaby is especially taking the lead in saying that I think even there are certain fees that they pay out a year after completion. And so the idea is not that like, and so it's staggered. And just by shifting that burden, that you're not having to come up with that cash right away. It was even like the landscaping deposit, the tree deposits, like all of those were expected in full up front. And the question, what, and it was a tree security deposit. So it was to basically make sure that the trees were protected. And yet there was like, we are going to do all the landscaping. So we're going to get this money back. But right now we can't even borrow against the value of that money. And sometimes it'd be, tens of thousands of dollars on that particular thing. And so there are a lot of those elements. But on your other element of the question around how does it factor into the finance decoder, I would also add that my experience in the city of Surrey, where I was working, it was that they were taking in cash from all over. And there's the prize of efficient use of that money really looms large. And so they were like, wow, we could take it from all of these projects and then build a single large community center, or they built a main library. They built all of these like big infrastructure, but they did it, miles and miles and miles away from wherever that housing was actually being brought into the community. And so the whole idea that you are offsetting the impact of new construction by improving the neighborhood never came to pass. And just to insist again that as we look at our housing code, sometimes when we say if we're going to charge a fee, that fee should actually have direct consequence in the place where it is being charged. This is where, small plug for tree replacement bylaws, which I think are a good thing, but I actually think they should be within the block. You have to find a place to put a tree. And most of the time that should be in the street, not directly in the street, but like on the sides of the street, even modifying some of the street, giving up some of the parking spaces, especially if you have a fire hydrant, create little planting zones right where that could be. Because the result of ongoing activity, construction activity in our neighborhoods often gives people the impression, well, there goes the neighborhood, instead of, the analogy of a good party being, wow, more people have come. And now we have like a better landscaped sort of area. We have all of these improvements. We have just that accumulation of benefit to us. And so I know that we want our major mega infrastructure to be funded by new development, but actually that is often at odds with the idea that the whole city bears responsibility for the upkeep of the sewer treatment plant. It's not that 15th resident that requires you to suddenly upgrade your plant. It's all 15. And so all of your existing people are the reason why your systems are at the capacity that they're at. And so it's a shared problem. And we sometimes say, but if you're the last person to enter, you're going to pay for everybody's sort of capacity problem. And so when we look at it more generally to say, let's really focus some of these fees or the way in which we spend it at the block by block level, which is maybe another little quick plug for the idea even of cities that I've encountered where they have created units that are based on space on a region or sort of a section of the city where planning, there's somebody that's responsible for planning that area. There's somebody responsible for public works in that area, for parks and recreation, for maintenance, and even for community and recreation. And they do nodes within their city government of, you're responsible for your area, you're responsible, instead of citywide sort of departments that are totally siloed. There can be a lot of value in that as well. But I want to pick up then, Aaron, you have asked a good question here on spot rezoning. You are running into issues of getting some properties rezoned from multifamily to urban neighborhood with smaller lot sizes and mixed uses, receiving significant community pushback, and asking for any advice on this. This is where I'll go to you, Edward, in a moment, because you've got a lot of thoughts on this. But I am pushing my city as we update our zoning bylaw, instead of small lot housing, to have smaller lot housing. It's a very modest thing, but it actually can be really valuable in beginning to say, are terms definite or are they suggestive of sort of a range? We often do this where it's like, oh, this is single. Single is definite. And to anybody, this is, to me, we have tons of single family homes with a secondary unit in them. I'm like, now we're jamming up the gears of what a definition actually means. It's also why I don't like when it's, we have a 2.5-story house. No, that is a 3-story house, folks. It's just 3 stories. Let's just be clear about that. And if we got into that habit, what is the difference between a multi-family sort of lot versus a urban neighborhood lot? Like, either of those are, they feel interchangeable. And yet within the planning profession, there's that effort to sort of say, this has this has sort of this characteristic, and word associations are really tricky, and not everybody's word associations work the same way that yours do when you're just sitting down with a piece of paper. And I think that can sometimes be a type of public engagement in the, if a community is looking at things. I think it's a good idea to take this term. What do you think? What words come to mind when you think of it, and be like, oh, that's probably not a good one. Let's pick something else. Yeah, Edward.
I see municipal staff do this all the time, and this is a great way for them to have somebody else take leadership in the job they should take on.
Hmm.
And I want to say that really bluntly because if you're moving forward in an application, staff and the planning commissioners need to support that move. They like moving stuff forward, they need to support it. There's a reason they have directed you to that zoning category. There's a reason it's in the zoning. It is probably also applying with comprehensive plans. It's probably applied to the 12 studies on a shelf that you need to move forward on. So this is like I'm being a little abrasive and pushing on staff, technical staff at City Hall on these things, and also the elected leadership, understanding that this is on the books. And if somebody's making the type of investment you are, and they're saying this is great, but then you're getting burnt out in the public, well, that's not your policy. You don't blame the player, blame that game. Where I might approach there's a couple of different things. So I'm always thinking about like, how do we work down that path? If I'm working on those types of developments, one of them is to go and spend a lot of energy to go and familiarize people with projects. So as you're developing it, it's a lots of cups of coffee, it's the ribbon cuttings in front of buildings, it's walking people through the things you're doing to show them that you're not bad developer, you're an investor in the community. Um, we recently had in my hometown the one of the new development opened up and they did a big ribbon cutting and the town did a big press release and had everybody and their brother show up. The developer told me they did that because when they go to the next town or the next project and somebody Googles them, this project shows up with lots of smiling faces and about all the benefits of this project that nobody believed in them in the initial phase came to fruition. If we're looking at the technical stuff, it is probably some really silly little things in the code between the orange and the dark orange that they want you to put on that zoning. That is something that staff could be incrementally working on in the background, moving stuff forward. So whatever it is, if it's a weird density thing, if it's a weird setback thing, if it's a use, there's probably one or two things that you're trying to get a caveat out of that you don't get in that other zoning, and they're requiring you to move to this other piece. I talked to some developers in Omaha, Nebraska, and they're requiring planned unit development for spots like single three like 100 by 100 foot lot, having to go and do a planned unit development, writing your own code for that. That to me is ludicrous. So working with the staff, working with technical folks, working with the planning commission to say, look, what we really want is this allowable use in this category. What we really want is an adjustment or a relaxation in the setbacks to match the type of character that's in the block. Your job then, as somebody in the community, as a strong citizen, as a developer, as somebody working in the community, is to make sure you provide the support and political cover when those ideas move forward. So make the investment to show up to public hearings, share your support of how that makes things better, share examples, go out, do the cups of coffee, do the tours, get the public familiar with it. And I always tell our local conversation leaders and the trainings with them, don't show up to City Hall. Your first day at City Hall at a public meeting shouldn't be requesting something or demanding something from the city. You should spend time showing up at public hearings, both planning commission and the city council, talking about the city you're working in. Introduce yourself as a resident, somebody wanting to make investments, and start with that simple phrase, I like my city because. You can spend 30 seconds, you can spend 3 minutes on it, but doing that multiple times builds your credibility up in the community as somebody that's looking towards the future, looking towards the opportunities and the things you like in your city, so that when you have to move that forward, feel free to do it. But again, this is one of those streamlining the process. How do we make the good easy in your community? And I suspect it's a couple of minor text edits in the existing zoning or thinking about that slightly differently, which is the craft and trade of your community planners at City Hall. So working with them to see that. My experience has been the ones that are the most brutal on my projects and all of the development review are the first ones to get in line for the ribbon cutting. And they tell me about how great the projects are. And it's like, okay, let's have that enthusiasm when we first came in the door and talked about investing in the community. And we have to kind of nurture that. I understand it's tough being in local government, but these are ways we can elevate and share that.
Oh, that's awesome. Anybody else want to jump in? For Aaron here, you've got a tough go just when it gets into the weeds of, well, that is not urban neighborhood. And so why are we having this brought in? Or maybe Aaron, do you want to explain even what is some of the pushback? Is it specifically around the word like urban? Because I like the word neighborhood. Neighborhood is a
It's
very good word. Urban is a little spooky.
Yeah, I don't even think it's the wording this time. So it's a new code. New thing in the code is urban neighborhood that they added, and technically from where we are is a down zone. So the lot that like I'm involved in, there's a bunch of different projects all at once trying to rezone from a local developer, and it's all in this part of town that was part of like the 1970s urban renewal, which was essentially, hey, let's take all these blighted neighborhoods with these nice little small businesses and then demolish them all and build a bunch of multifamily. And so it got rezoned as RMF 24 in the 70s, like all of South Fayetteville.
Hmm.
And so we're now looking at doing like cluster housing developments, like small little like corner cafes, and the urban neighborhood would allow that. It puts new restrictions, like you can't build a 5-story, 24 unit apartment complex like you can now, but you can do like a 3-story building with commercial use on the bottom floor. And so the one that's getting the most pushback is the one that wants to open a corner cafe as part of this redevelopment of this parcel. And the main concern there being is, the clutch my pearls, the traffic. And then the other
All
one
the
is the one I,
lewd, caffeinated loungers, right?
oh my God, yeah, exactly. It was comical, to be honest, in the planning commission when that came up. And then the one that I'm involved in that I didn't think would get any pushback is like right next to a community center, like right next to this old like public housing project. And we're like, hey, we want to do cluster housing, and we want the ability to like on the edges of this cluster housing project to possibly build some commercial unit space around there to kind of, bring back what used to exist here 100 years ago. Like across the street is a parking lot now, a small one. But it used to be like this bar that was famous because it's right behind the county courthouse. And so that's where everybody used to go. And so like people like gush about, oh, Sherman's. But now like I feel like I'm kind of getting the gun pointed at me being like, how dare you come in and, the word that was brought up last night at city council agenda was gentrify the
Mhm.
neighborhood. And, I don't know. Like it was just it's like last night the new one was, well, you're going to cause everybody's taxes to go up, and I'm like, I don't know how I'm like, I don't know what to say other than I'm not responsible for that.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and like I said, like we have planning commission support, like all of but one was unanimously approved, and city staff is fully behind it. But based on some what city council members said last night at agenda, I'm really afraid we're not going to get this rezone. And I just don't know what type of argument I can make to other than like beg and plead,
That's
please don't kill this project.
that's where you
Yeah.
go with staff and the planning commissioners and say, I want to talk to the council. That's where you go and you
Okay.
set up a meeting with the council and say, look, and you meet with as many as you possibly can. You tell them I'm passionate about this. I've done other projects, and you need to run through with them that you want to be available to answer any questions they have about this development. At the same time, build up your coalition of residents and other folks that have done these projects, that live in these places, and have them available for council members to meet with. I've seen, uh, I'll give you an example. There was a rezoning application that came forward that I saw. And the planners put the big map up and they talked about what they were going to do and all this stuff. And the one older woman came up from the back row and got up and told how awful it was. She was going to see all this stuff out of her back window, like, and she described a place that didn't match what we were talking about. And after 20 minutes of her running around, getting everybody all riled up on it, finally somebody asked her, "Well, what's your address?" And she said, "Well, my address is 11 Maple Street." And they said, "Well, ma'am, it's not here on the map. You are way over here. Like, that's where your house is. We're not even near where your house is." Oh, then forget about all that. I'm not concerned about it.
Hmm.
So it's that always will show up
Mhm.
at the public meetings, but behind the scenes, meeting with elected officials, talking to them, letting them know who you are, making it available. Let them know if they have a constituent that has called them to complain about it, give them your phone number. Say, I will take the heat. You don't need to explain the project. You explain the city. But it comes to defending the project, I will do that as a developer, make that available. I used to have that phone number for all of the developers working in the community I was serving. Um, Out of 100 times I gave that out, there were probably 2 phone calls that resulted in it. And I assure you, the messaging that came from the developer was well received because the resident never thought the big developer would give them the time of day. So just the availability. So when the council member gets up and people come and complain about it, they can say, we've been through a process. I talked to you beforehand. I gave you the phone number of the developer. Did you take a chance to talk to them? Did they call you? Like, you're providing them that political cover to balance your risk. And so that's the next level of showing up at City Hall and saying why you like your city is meeting with the elected officials, the ultimate decision makers, and making sure that you're aligned in that work. Uh, Once you get that moving forward, then you can start to say, look, wouldn't it just be easier if this was by right or I didn't have to rezone it? So we could be talking about other important things in the city.
Yeah. I man, where does the time go? We do have two. Greg and Don both had dropped in questions in the Ask Around Towns Anything question box. So let's get to both of those questions, which means we're probably going to go a bit over time. But hey, I'm there for it. This is my jam. But if you do have to step away, definitely let us know. Either Greg or Don, if either of you have to leave at the top of the hour, let me know. But otherwise, we'll start with Don because you had submitted yours first. Don, you want to just introduce it live? You asked about community land trusts.
Yes, I did. Community land trust, I've been learning about it through the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy out in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And they talk about community land trust whereby a city possibly will donate unused land, or you get philanthropically a piece of land. You can take that and use that as leverage that you own it. Your group, your land trust owns the land itself, and you rent it essentially to the people. You build houses, you rent the land, which brings the cost down. They do not have to pay for the land, brings the cost down, and then you get some type of rental assistance type situation sometimes from the state or local or the city. The city benefits because they get vacant land back on the tax rolls. They get houses, they get home ownership. The whole focus is home ownership as opposed to rental. So I'm concerned about community land trust being a viable way to bring the affordability into better play. The affordability stays there. By renting the land, the people get the benefit of home ownership. They get tax breaks for the interest payments they pay from the bank. They get pre-qualified. They get counsel to make sure they're now good homeowners, how they deal with these kinds of things. And when they decide to sell, they get a good amount of that equity. So now they're building wealth instead of just paying rental payments. And then the subsidy is not a subsidy that the city has to keep infusing cash because you keep it down in the affordable range. It is not a loan, it's not a grant. The community land trust works with you to determine the sales price. You get a little bit of the equity, you get benefit of the home ownership, but yet it still stays affordable for the next person that goes. It seems like a very good incremental type of approach. What's your thoughts?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the land banks, the interesting piece with the land bank is that when you're dealing with housing, there's two major costs: land cost and then the construction cost. What the land bank does is it removes the cost of the land.
Mhm.
So in many, many places, the land cost will exceed the construction cost. So lots of cities are using that, and they're different. When we talk about land banking, fundamentally is somebody's own has control of the land, and then they're building buildings on it, and they're selling the building on the land or renting the buildings on the land. But there's other different nuances in states that deal with how that operates. So, yes, this is one of the tools in the toolkit to do that. It works really well when, because this now puts it into a managed system. So there's lots of not-for-profits and a lot of development groups that are familiar with this type of process. When, so the land value stays steady in that, it's not included, and the buildings, whatever, I've heard different ways that wealth can be created on those buildings to resell, and people move out of those over time. So yeah, it's an important tool. There's lots and lots of documentation on it. There's lots of benefits to it. Um, every state has various types of land banks, both publicly held and privately held in it. So yeah, it is a great tool.
Mhm.
Thank you.
I think one of the underlying responsibilities is to ensure that the ownership of the land is not at odds with the idea of enduring affordability. So in British Columbia, which is I'm most familiar with, there were several pension funds that owned land and allowed co-ops, so nonprofit co-op housing, to be built on their land, and it seemed like a win-win. The pensions were, getting some revenue coming from that land, and the co-op was then available to be there. The trouble is they then looked at the return on their land holdings and said, we need to improve the land holdings. So at the end of the lease tenure, they then said, here's your new rate. And the nonprofit housing co-op was just flabbergasted, had not anticipated any of that, and really was caught off guard, by a public pension fund who said, we have an obligation to our pension holders to maximize return here. There can be other instances like that with mobile home parks that would come closest, where I think some of the best opportunities for community land trusts are to try to swoop in earlier with mobile home parks and purchase the land underneath the mobile homes, because once it gets up to the point where the market has really swelled the value of that land, the holders of that land are looking to sell, as we see happening in a lot of places where very affordable housing in the type of model that is a parallel to what you're describing can be there. But the other need is, as always, to have that clarity that if there's a path into ownership, people need some reservoir of wealth to be able to borrow against in order to continue to make improvements. So this is one of the areas where you can see mobile home parks begin to really decline. If people are not improving their mobile homes, not doing sort of basic maintenance, keeping up the roofs and things like that, it has a destabilizing impact on others. And this is where, for me, it really helped when Chuck framed the language that cities have two currencies in their community: land, which is just that stored resource, and they determine how it is used, and then confidence. If people in your community have a sense of confidence that their investment is going to earn a return, so if they paint their porch, that it won't simply be, torn down in 2 years, and that porch painting was worthless. If you have that sense that there's a bit of a flywheel effect, that improvements are going to be beneficial in a longer term to justify your investment, then many people will make that investment. And gentrification is actually a good thing in that regard, where people are willing to invest in properties and see its fortune improve. the trouble with gentrification is when it becomes runaway and results in displacement of existing people that are within those communities. But yeah, I do think that there is just there's I wish, sort of when's the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is today. It's sort of like that with community land trusts. It would have been amazing if we had more of them, you know, built and established when prices were way lower. But I still think that it's a significant opportunity for philanthropy, for really wise use of public resources in that way as well. Private resources, public resources too. Anyone else with experience with land trusts? This is actually one of those questions that often comes up, and it felt like Chuck and Daniel didn't cover it as much in their book on housing. They had lots of other things to cover, and they got chapters that got cut out. Anyone else with direct experience with a land trust that you want to jump in? All right. Maybe this is still an area for development. All right, let's last question then for the day. And we still have a few folks rolling in. I'm so glad that you're joining us. That's awesome. But Greg, you're asking, how should clustered communities address housing? Maybe, Greg, do you want to define or explain that a little bit more, what you mean by a cluster community, and then ask about the way in which your sort of the tension has emerged within your New England communities?
Sure. I guess I just mean clustered in the sense of a lot of small communities that are proximate to each other, and specifically where a housing market and sort of overall economy are decidedly regional, but planning and regulations are town by town in nature, and towns in many cases geographically are small too, so you don't necessarily know when you're crossing a border per se. And so I guess in that context, I'm curious just if folks have thoughts on on how to advance some of the key ideas from Edward's deck earlier, across a multi-jurisdictional context, and how to approach that. I kind of play both an advocacy role and a municipal role in different towns, but but how to think about that at a regional level as opposed to just within specific towns, if there's any examples of success there or ideas to focus on.
Yeah.
My experience has been to go to the most local level of decision making and focus there. So there's a lot of regional, we would describe it top down, but even on like a regional or county-wide, let's get all the cities to think about this in the same way. It's really hard to do that because every city has like one of the communities I worked in was down in Florida, and I had 7 redevelopment areas. These were 7 unincorporated neighborhoods that were overseen by the county commission. So the county commission didn't want to make any decision in these little historic towns because that would be applied to the whole county, even though
Right.
apples and oranges. And then even amongst, when I would think that I had all 7 aligned for something, it would be like there'd be the one outlier. What we've found and kind of this idea of testing in small bets is work on something in one of those towns. Work on one of the pieces, let it be successful, let people become familiarized with it, and then use that as a standing point to say, look what they did over there. Could we do that here? And share the knowledge, because usually, like, I'm in West Virginia, all the small towns, we all talk to each other. So the planners may be thinking about that even if the elected officials aren't. So we get the toolkit set up, we see what other cities are doing, and everybody, when some code gets adopted, when something gets experimental in a community, we try to make the next one better. So by working on that most local level, and it may even be, even in a really small town, it may be something as simple as the ADUs or rear yard cottages being only permitted in a small area of a very, very small town as an introduction to show that, hey, once we've adopted that, it hasn't hurt anybody. Once we get that adopted, then there's always going to be the house 3 doors down that's not in the boundary that wants to be in it. We're having a much smaller conversation then. Like we did in the area that people desired, it worked. The earth didn't open up, the heavens didn't turn to fire. Um, and then there's desire now in the community because they were able to do it, and we have that familiarized approach. That may seem very small. It may seem that that doesn't happen very quickly, but by doing that, I have found that it can actually move through the process very, very quickly. It speeds up
Mhm.
because now we've familiarized it. We've disarmed folks with it. They're not concerned that this is going to be a takeover of some government agency. It just working through those pieces. Um, so think
Yeah.
think regionally with that in your knowledge base and your tool set, but the actual implementation may be as simple as something as a block or a single downtown to start.
And I think that's consistent with several different elements of the Strong Towns message that I had to learn over time. One is embracing the idea of small bets, but also doing so in the context of a local community would be that you say you had 7 sort of neighboring cities. If one of them begins to demonstrate genuine benefit to the community, it'll always be somewhat mixed. There will always be a reason to be opposed, but for a few folks. But if there can be that demonstration of benefit from that relaxing of rules or allowing more accessory dwelling units or cottages in backyards, this type of activity, the consequence can be that it becomes more appealing. I know in my region, the British Columbia government introduced legislation to require up to 4 units on every single lot. And I have actively seen in the way that many of the cities have gone about setting it up in their official community plans, they seem to either be overtly or unwittingly sabotaging the very intended policy outcomes of it. And the consequence is that now people are getting ready to run for municipal government on platforms saying, see, it's not working. It's not working. The government said this would happen. And that is one of those like major besetting sins of these types of top-down sort of systems. The idea is clear the deck, remove some of the obstacles. That might be where state level intervention is needed. But when it becomes prescriptive, it actually really is easy to confound those purposes. And then the other element of it is that everyone now, because of the benefit of large language models, has that intern that is able to compare this zoning code from neighborhood 1 with this zoning code from neighborhood 2 and find the 5 differences that for reasons of local character or local custom or Bob insisting on something at planning commission, that is there. Because I for a long time I was sympathetic to developers that said, look, if I'm in the Lower Mainland, I'm dealing with 36 different municipalities. Nobody should be expected to deal with this. We should become one. And now I'm actually on the exact opposite because I've not seen unification efforts work well in cities. Look at Toronto, look at Winnipeg in Canada, look at other places in the States where you can create these mega complexes. And then you get something like the city of LA that is part of, I think, 18 or 20 different like overlapping jurisdictions. You create this like maze of chaotic sort of regulations. The benefit to very localized regulation is that now if I have a property here, I can do a quick search. These are the types of things that I can expect. And if you have done a project in a neighboring municipality, you just do a quick search. I mean, I know I use the word quick, but it involves a bit of that work. But what's different here? Which of these things are alike? Which of these things are different? And then being able to be ready for that. And we employ architects who train in dissecting these types of codes. I feel like it actually gives a leg up for your very small, sort of nimble local developer. And want to put in a plug for the ideas of the Incremental Development Alliance and Neighborhood Evolution, where they say, get to know your farm, your sort of little area where you are cultivating that soil. And each project that you do is like the introduction of mulch and fertilizer and all of these things to help that place just be stronger. And then when you do another project, all of a sudden you've created more vitality in that area. And by always working within a very close proximity, you actually create lasting benefits for your original project so that the person that first bought from you is so pleased because as more of your work happened around them, the entire neighborhood began to be improved as you went along. We saw this in Providence, Rhode Island, where Seth Zarin, who's written for Strong Towns and is a longtime Strong Towns member, one of the original founding members, he has basically been working in his little sort of section on multifamily or duplexes, triplexes, that sort of stuff within the neighborhood. And we did a walking tour there, and it was just incredible to see how it's built and lifted up the fabric and vitality of the neighborhood through that type of work. And he said, I come back to the exact same set of plans to do another project or the same set of policies in these places and make that happen. So part of it, Greg, might be to pick your favorite and try to do all your work there, and then make it known why they're your favorite. I think sometimes planners and other city staff will become aware that they are not the pick of the litter, and it should motivate them to take on that next step. And I think this is where, as a wrap up this sort of diatribe, is they will then take a look at what is best practice that some other nearby community has done. Not just, Colorado passed zoning reform, therefore we should in New England states. No, it's actually this nearby community. They seem to be really like moving things. Let's just, pick that up and run with that ourselves. I want more copycats. I want more like copycats of small bets that have worked and improvements that have happened.
One very brief follow-up question.
Yeah.
Thank you for all that. I'm just curious, have you found any particular large language model to be most useful in analyzing? I mean, I obviously with all the requisite caveats, measure twice, cut once, etc. But
Yeah.
Any stand out for you in that regard?
I only know ChatGPT. For this type of work, it is very good. There's so many things that I just refer to it as the intern, and the intern, you give it the instructions, and it's sort of, if you've ever had to manage an intern or a summer student, if garbage in, garbage out. But if you're say only look at these things, and define exactly, where it is and provide sources and then do a bit of spot checking. That's the tool that I've used. Edward, any other recommendations? There probably is like a niche one that,
I use chat all the time, and you can upload all the codes and policies. I've also been playing with Grok, so that's the X version, and I play with that because it searches all of the social stuff. So if you want, you can actually ask it what people's feedback is on these types of things. So you get all that vile social stuff too. So what are you going to face in that social media realm? Which has been really, for me, it's been really helpful. I'm also finding emerging ideas with that maybe chat won't pick up just because of where they're kind of hunting and searching. So I'm using multiple ones, and tomorrow there'll be another refinement and update on another one.
because it's about pattern recognition, and the patterns. I think that in some states there have been efforts to try to standardize the way that it's referred to. But Aaron, you were using, RF24, and I'm like, I'm guessing that's like units per hectare, sort of, or sorry, not hectare, it would be acres. Like, my community, we have 18 different zoning things, but there's a bit of overlap. And so if the pattern sort of resembles, you can ask it. Even one of the other questions that I use all the time is, what are 10 questions to ask me that I can help clarify before you run this exercise? And it's just, it's remarkable how that can be very useful for that as well. So, we are probably at peak capacity. I know certainly my bladder is. So I'm going to have to step away in a moment here. This has been fantastic. Thank you all for participating. This is one of the highlights of my week. I know for Edward as well. Connecting with Don, your question, Greg, Richard in the chat, fantastic stuff, Greg. Appreciate that, Erica, Troy. Man, we got through quite a number, and there's still more to go. So next week, it's an open slate right now. We haven't given a theme, so if we see a bunch of questions, we'll put together a theme related to that. If this was your first Ask Strong Towns Anything, and you didn't get a chance to ask Strong Towns, I hope that you did get a chance to really just enjoy it and appreciate the time that we had together. As always, keep doing what you can to build strong towns in your community. Really appreciate your time today, and take care, folks. Have a good one.